want to talk about interviewing for the next 4 sessions here. We have less than about 8 hours to do that. For 5 years, probably about 10 semesters, I taught interviewing at the University of Iowa Journalism School to undergraduates. So initially, when they approached me and asked me what did I want to teach this time, I thought, okay, well, just boil down that 15-week course into something like this. And you're giggling because you were aware of something I wasn't when I thought it's very difficult to do that. What we're going to do over the next 4 sessions is talk a little bit about interviewing from different perspectives. Today, we're going to start close at home with sort of my perspective, my process of approaching interviewing. Halfway through the class, after our break, one of my producers, Emily Woodbury, will be joining us. She's also a former student of mine, as is Lindsay Moon. These are names you hear mentioned at the end of River to River, key people who are not given enough praise or attention for the work they do behind the scenes. Emily does host occasionally as well. So she'll be here to give a producer's view, and I think that's even more interesting in some ways than the host, because everybody says, what does a producer do? They like to think I do it all, which is nice to think, but it's not true. It's a team effort, and you'll understand a little bit more about that after this class. In our second session next week, just to give you a little run-through, a little preview of the next few sessions, we'll have Diane Bystrom of Iowa State University. What I really wanted to reach out there is, one of the most common things, especially when you're interviewing politicians, is why don't they answer the question, right? That is the question we all have. Why don't they answer the question like normal folk do? Well, Diane will answer that next week because she is a media trainer. She has trained people who are up and coming in politics, and you get to find out what they hear. Like if you become a potential star in the Republican or the Democratic Party, how you will be told to respond to interviewers like me. So we'll interview her about that. Following that, we'll have B.J. Franklin here as a guest. That'll be the third session. This is a hard-hitting session because she is, in the course of my work or any journalist's work, you're bound to have to interview traumatized people. She is a victim's advocate, and she has for many years worked with families who have had someone in their family murdered. So as you can imagine, the media descends on your family wanting to know about this. All kinds of things happen, and she's an advocate that stands up for families who have all these kind of traumas in addition to losing a family member. And she will actually be bringing a survivor along with us, the mother of the mother of a woman who was killed. So just to be aware of that, and I don't know your backstories, it might be an uncomfortable session in a certain way, but I think it's an important session to have, and it was always an important session for my young journalism students to have, so that you are not the one at the door pestering a grieving family in an inappropriate way. And finally, I haven't figured out the guest for the fourth session, so that's what it'll be. That is yet to be announced, as they say. I love questions, interaction with the class, so please, at the times that I ask for interaction and your thoughts, let's get those bubbling. A quick little bit of bio on me. I grew up in Cedar Falls. If you were here before the class started, I'm actually born in the Cornhusker State, was brought to the Hawkeye State at the age of 4, and my parents still live there. They're in their 80s. And I grew up in Cedar Falls, and then I went to the University of Iowa for my undergraduate degree. In the late 90s, the late 80s rather, I moved to Europe, where I found my wife. This is at the beginning, so this is 89. This is approximately 4 weeks before the fall of the wall. I had the good fortune, lucky I guess, of moving to Germany a matter of a couple months before all of that started to go in the fall of 1989. So this is me at a memorial. You see the wall still standing there, to those who tried to escape from East Berlin and were killed, were murdered. So let me see, just to give you a couple other visual images. This is the day after the wall fell. That is the then mayor of Berlin, Walter Momper. I am there with a glitzy star on my shoulder. What was that about? I don't know. Interviewing him along, and the man on the right is, I forget his name, he's a BBC reporter.
Were you working for some organization?
I was working for Radio Deutsche Welle. This is the voice, the equivalent of the Voice of America for Germany, but we produced a program in English for the United States, a weekly program called Across the Atlantic. So there I am interviewing this woman. Actually was interesting. She was an organ grinder. You can't really see her organ there. And she went back to the Weimar Republic. So she remembered, she was especially interesting to interview because she had lived through, was born in a democracy, went through the Second World War, went through the whole communist era in East Germany, in East Berlin, where she lived, and now this was the day that the wall fell that I was interviewing her. So that was kind of really a formative experience to be part of that. I've got to go to the next tab. Very quickly with the bio information. These are my three kids, all three of them born in Germany. This is a few weeks ago at Big Grove. My daughter in the middle, though, she is the smallest. She's trying to hold herself up. That's Daria. She's at Berkeley right now. She's studying landscape architecture. On my side, closest to me, that's my youngest, Liam. He's finishing up his senior year at West High here. And my other son, the older son, is Sawyer on the far side away from me there. And he just graduated from the University of Iowa and is applying to various medical schools, and we'll see how that turns out. Okay. Let me go away. There, go away. There's my wife and I. Marking news here in the area, right? We were there. That's the first day Trader Joe's opened. Look at those smiles. We must have been waiting for that. Besides my activities as a journalist, I love to swim. If you look at my Facebook page, I'll friend you if you'd like to be my friend on Facebook. But the common comment I hear is, all you really put up are pictures about swimming that have to do with swimming. I'm an avid swimmer in open water and some would say cold water. This is a 5K swim that I did right prior to a 5K swim in Lake West Okoboji a few weeks ago. So I've done a lot of nice swims. Escaped from Alcatraz, swam from Alcatraz to San Francisco, swam from one of the Apostle Islands, Madeline Island, to the mainland up there in Lake Superior as well. So I think that's it for the pictures for right now. Yes, it is. Community volunteer as well. I'm a certified lifesaver and CPR, so that I volunteer at the city pool. You may see me as a lifeguard once in a while there too, and I like to volunteer at the bike library. Everybody know what the bike library is? It's really a great thing. I feel like I'm volunteering, but I'm getting so much more than what I'm giving in repairing bikes. So let's talk a little bit about what your ideas are about interviewing. I'm interested. We have 3 ways to collect information. When you're a journalist, 3 ways to collect information. What are they? Let me pick up the other microphone because I know I'll be wandering a little bit. Okay, are we on this? Yes, it sounds like we are. How do we get information? Three main ways to get information.
Read.
You can read. You can research to find out your information. What is another way?
Ask questions.
Interviewing. Yeah, ask questions. That's what we're going to be talking about here. One last way to get your information as a journalist.
Observing.
Perfect. That is exactly the word, observing. So those are the three ways that we can do that. We're going to focus on interviewing during this session. What is the point of an interview? And let me get over to the mic, get over to you for those who want to. What is the point of an interview? And it can be very subjective. What do you think, in your words, is the point of an interview? Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
Have people open up and tell us something about themselves.
Right, open up. I love that phrase, open up. Yes, tell something about yourself. What else? Here we go. Mary.
You often get a bit of history.
You get a bit of history on the person or perhaps the issue you're talking about. What else is the point of an interview?
Perspective.
Perspective, right. We inhabit our own bodies. We know we are experts on our own lives, but we are one person, and so it's valuable for us to understand different perspectives. Okay, here's the other question. What makes an interview interesting or compelling? It's one of those things, you know it when you hear it. Terry Gross has an interview and you just, we call them driveway moments. You have to sit there instead of going into New Pioneer to buy whatever you want to buy there. You just stick around, right?
Terry personalizes. She makes it a story that you can embrace in your own life.
Right. That's good. She personalizes it. Makes it, another way, it sounds like you're saying she makes it very relevant to you, makes it relatable. Do we have anybody over here that we didn't get to? Okay, Mary again.
Terry also always knows about her subject and about, if she has a musician, she knows their music. Mm-hmm. She's done the work.
She's done the work, and that makes it really interesting. Contrast Terry Gross with someone like Larry King, who will hold up the book at the beginning, or did, hold up the book at the beginning of the show and say, so what's this book about? Would be his first question typically, right? Because he hasn't read the book. and it's a different style of interviewing, and of course Larry King has has years under his belt and the popularity to show that some people like that approach as well. What else makes an interview compelling? Let's go back here. John.
You can actually evoke a response from the person you're interviewing that you wouldn't get from reading about it, perhaps.
That is key. That is key, isn't it? Is that there's something about human interaction that compels us because there's something of the unexpected there, right? If I would stand up here, let's say any given topic, if someone is going to stand up here and give you 30 minutes of a talk, that can be very compelling too. But generally, a conversation is something that just in terms of personal interaction that we're attracted to as humans, and also because it's kind of unexpected, right? Surprises.
We like to have a little surprise.
Yeah, we like to have a little surprises. Okay. Any other parts before we go to the other side of this? What makes an interview compelling? We're going to next ask, what do you hate about interviews? What happens that just drives you nuts? Are we already there? Did we have any of the good? You guys are bursting with those comments. But any of the other ones that compelling parts? What makes a good interview? Yeah, let's go back here.
It's kind of piggybacking on what others said, but it goes deeper. You're learning new things, and it's a lot to do with the interviewer is helping to get deeper.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're going deeper. The interviewer, in a certain way, is a stand-in for you. Yeah, and so this might be a good jumping point to go to the things that may bother you if you're listening to an interview. If the interviewer, if I am a stand-in for you, because we can't have everybody in Iowa asking this, Charles Grassley or whoever it is, if I don't ask the question that you want asked, it can really be annoying, right? Like he gives an answer and, well then you've got to ask this question, right? And if the interviewer doesn't ask that question, you're like, gah, next time I see that Ben Kieffer. Okay, so what other things are kind of annoyances or things that bother you when you listen to interviews?
Make people feel badly. That is, they embarrass the person.
and they're looking for something that they're not getting from whoever it is they're interviewing. And the person, Jimmy Kimmel is an example of that.
Do you have an example of one person he was talking to about?
Well, at the beginning of his program, he goes out on the street and interviews people, and he's trying to make fun of them, really.
Yes.
And I mean, that's a type of interviewing that I don't appreciate. That type of interviewing.
Right. And some of us like that sort of man or woman on the street interview where someone is caught off guard and they're made to look. They look dumb. They look stupid. Something like that. So what else bothers you, Donna?
It's irritating when the interviewer talks too much and doesn't give the people a chance.
Were you pointing at me when you said that?
No, I listen to you almost every day.
The interviewer talks too much. Yeah, and that's something that we had, especially in teaching undergrad, so journalism students, is you try to drive home the idea. Simple questions. Yeah, you don't have to make a paragraph long question. Get to the question. Talk like a normal person. Ask a simple question. That's a very good point. What else drives you crazy about interviews that we haven't mentioned yet? Dorothy.
I get irritated when the person doing the interviewing does not make the subject or push the subject to really answer the question.
Right. And that's an interesting dynamic there. And I think we'll talk with Diane Bystrom of Iowa State University about that too, because that really gets at a couple different things. The difference between print reporters, or radio reporters, or if you're live, my show is typically live or not live. If I don't bring it up when I talk about types of interviews, make sure you remind me, because it's a very important point. The degree to which you can badger someone for an answer is a very interesting thing. And you reminded me, I want to bring up an interview I did with our Senator Charles Grassley not too long ago. It was only a few days after the firing of James Comey on the FBI. And of course, Charles Grassley is the head of the chair of the Judiciary Committee. And so we had this previously planned interview with him, and then the firing took place, and I was rubbing my hands, as journalists do, gleefully, and hoping that the senator's office would not cancel out on us. And I wanted to play a part of that interview, not today, I think it'll be a little, where you see that actually happen, where I ask him, if I'm recalling, I have to review the tape. Okay, so James Comey, it was the day that James Comey testified about what actually happened between him and the president. So we had the president's version, and we got James Comey's version just an hour or two before I spoke with Senator Grassley live. And so the question was, well, whose version do you believe here? Because they're so different. So we'll review that. I have to review that myself. Okay, what other pet peeves?
Well, I hate when interviewers keep asking closed-ended questions over and over. So the interviewee is saying yes or no, and it's just boring.
Right. When does that happen? That's a basic thing that open-ended questions. How, why, explain to me. These are phrases that you'll hear. Help us understand is a favorite one. How can it be that hows and whys, but not, yes or no questions? Bad idea, right, Terry? What else? We pretty much got to a number of those. Okay. Programs, you've already mentioned a few of them. Programs that you interview, programs that you listen to regularly, just kind of shout them out. Charity Nebby. Talk of Iowa with Charity Nebby, absolutely, yeah. River to River, thank you very much. Charlie Rose, Terry Gross, Krista Tippett, yeah, On Being.
Is it different interviewing someone in person or on the radio or on the telephone, or if you're not face to face? Is there a difference in the interview?
It changes it quite a bit. In fact, Terry Gross, if you read, I don't know if she has more than one biography. She prefers, not over the phone, but in a different studio, she prefers not to see the people, even though you picture her, if you don't know this, you picture her in the same studio as her guest, but actually she's not. And if she's true to her word in the book that she wrote, she likes not to be there, because, and I can understand this too, you lose some information, but you gain a little bit of an advantage. If you want to ask sensitive questions, it's much harder if you're like right here, right? And Terry Gross, this would be a good example to have too. Terry Gross, we played an interview with Hugh Hefner, who just died. And it's amazing. I marveled at it listening to it too, because Hugh Hefner has these young ladies that accompanied him into his older age and was with him. And basically, she wanted to ask what's on a lot of people's mind is, why do they even hang around with you? You know? And so she does that in such a marvelous way with so much tact that I just marvel at, you know, you got the answer from Hugh Hefner about what that is, but you didn't, you know, another way of asking would have made him clam up.
She didn't use much tact with him.
You don't think she used much tact?
That is the one interview of hers kept cringing and cringing. In my view, she went so far overboard and wouldn't let it go. And she got answers, real answers, and it was like she was just obsessing about his sex life. And I get it.
Well,
That he did too. He obsessed about it.
right.
But I thought, stop already. You can ask other questions.
You know, Terry, it is. We're gonna try to play some of that interview, and we'll see what the class thinks of your opinion versus my opinion. I think she was really good, and you were bothered by that. Okay. I'm going to take a break in just a moment, but let's get quickly to cover some of the basics about the type of interviews that we consume. I produce radio interviews for the ear. You can walk your dog. You can make that great pot of chili. You can work on your woodworking. You can do a lot of things. That's what I love about audio interviews is you can walk around and do all kinds of other things that don't require a certain type of thinking. Print interviews have, well, I'll just say, lack a dimension. What is that dimension? When you see quotes in a newspaper. I mean, very rarely, it's an interesting question too to see, it's not very popular to have an interview. You don't see it very often in a magazine or a newspaper where you have question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Right? But I'll just say it to save a little time here. So when we have print interviews, it's more or less what is said, right? We don't have any of the sort of nonverbal signals, the emphasis of each word in a sentence. We just have the words. Of course, a good journalist can describe how the person said it, but that's a subjective call. If you hear it, your ears can judge whether that person said it with scorn or with glee or something like that. So you've got print, you add audio, and you get this wonderful thing of being able to size up a person merely by the voice and by the way they tell you about their life or the issue they care about. And then we go to TV, and we have the visual, which we add that, and that tends to give us more information about the person, whether it's Donald Trump being interviewed or Hillary Clinton being interviewed. And sometimes that can overpower, you might say, what they're saying, and how they say it is what they look like when they're saying it, right? So those are all very different things, and it's interesting to think about those as well. One of the other things that's you may not have thought about, you mentioned Terry Gross a lot. She's a favorite of mine, and I, in certain situations, I'll even think to myself sitting at my desk, okay, I've got to tackle this. How would Terry Gross do that? It's not a how would Jesus do it. It's how would Terry Gross How would Terry Gross get this information out of the interview partner? Terry Gross follows Charity's show, is right before my show. It's very different in what way? Sorry?
Both of yours and Charity's are more Iowa-based.
Right. There's a key kind of difference, not only the content, that is exactly right, but there's a key difference as well. That I'm always surprised people, because it doesn't seem like it, but there's a key difference. Terry Gross's interviews are always, I think, with 99.5% of the time, I don't know if we're ever doing a live interview. Ever doing a live interview. Right? Charity and I do most of our interviews live. In fact, that's what we go for. We try to get our guests live. If there's a reason that they can't make it to the noon hour or the 10 o'clock hour, then we have to record it beforehand, something like that. So think about that. And that's something as a listener that I find is I don't know if it's underappreciated or just the difference is not well known. Because when you record something, and I've a longtime producer of Terry Gross, grew up in Iowa City, the daughter of Mary and Peter Nazareth, Monique Nazareth. You heard her in the credits for many years, if that name rings a bell. I think 10 years, more than 10 years she produced for Terry Gross and then moved on to Diane Ream's show in Washington. And, so I had the chance to talk to her and interview her about being Terry Gross's producer. And I've also talked with others who have been on Terry Gross's interviewed. Sometimes they'll actually come to our studio. They'll be sitting in our studio and Terry will be in Philadelphia. But typically for, let's say you have a half an hour of Terry Gross interview that you hear, there could be twice or three times the amount of interview that actually took place. So that gives the interviewer and the producers a lot of power, editorial power, power to what they will say too is to crystallize it, to kind of bring it down to something that is easier to digest. There's no more rambling. It's all very streamlined. But when you listen to it, it seems like, oh, they just sat down and had this conversation. No, those are bits and pieces of, that 30 minutes is bits and pieces of a 90-minute conversation. You can get even more extreme ratios, like This American Life, asking Ira Glass, I asked him, how much, for I think they do it usually in 3 acts if it's typical. So let's say it's a 20 or 15-minute segment. How much do you record in terms of interviews for that 15 or 20 minutes? What do you think? Just say. 2 hours? 6 hours? 10 hours. What? 10 hours. 10 hours. You're almost there. His answer was 14 hours for 15 to 20 minutes. So they are looking for the absolute shiniest diamonds in that makes sense in terms of a distilled version of that. Okay. I think we're going to take a little break and, yeah, go ahead.
What's the definition of an interview? How do you define an interview?
Do I have the break to think about it or look at it? No. Define it, it's a conversation. In fact, one word answers a conversation, and in a lot of ways, a conversation, a guided conversation with a point. Okay, that is meant to be consumed by a larger audience. So it's not just two people talking in a coffee house. It's two people having a conversation, knowing that they are being heard or will be heard by a larger audience, either through the newspaper, in their responses, on the radio, or on the television.
Are you after something? During the interview, are you always after something special?
Yes, you're after, broadly speaking, understanding that person's perspective. Now, it may be an individual with a life story to tell. Charity does a lot of those. Very often with me, it's a news issue. So if you Catherine are on my show and you're representing some community organization, I want to understand your organization's goals by talking to you and making that to make your point of view, your perspective as real as possible. Yeah.
By all your experience of interviewing, has anyone ever changed your mind?
Actually, yeah. I'm going to need to think about specific examples of that, but I know I have been changed. Emily's right back here, one of my producers. Emily, she's going to be up joining me in just a minute. I don't know if Emily did, but I think I shared this with Emily after this. We went, not too long ago, we went to a gun training course in Hiawatha for our gun week. And so we went there on a Saturday, and it was a course put on by this Midwest Shooting Inc. I think that was it. And we were up there, and so they have a really neat little operation. They have a store with all the stuff there, and then they have classrooms, a live shooting range, a simulated shooting classroom there too. And so it was really to understand. I don't own a gun. So in that way, I'm not part of the gun culture. So it was to understand the gun culture and then understand it so that I could relay it to listeners. And I don't know if we'd call it changing my mind. It made me appreciate this because this was actually, we went there on a class and Emily selected it perfectly as a class only for women. I mean, it'd be too easy. Guys love guns. I mean, you put a plastic gun in a kid's crib, and if it's a boy, oh wow! I don't know if that's an exaggeration or not. But so this we had a chance to talk with a half dozen women, Iowans. Some of them wanted to remain anonymous about why they were at a gun class for a concealed carry gun. So these are women that you're going to see at New Pioneer or you're going to see at Walmart, and under their garments, they are carrying maybe even more than one weapon. And they are, believe me, they are everyday people. You may be one of these people too, right? There's maybe someone concealing a weapon in here right now. That's what opened my eyes, and if anyone would call that changing your mind. But to talk to them about why would you do this? The answer for me was they don't have any confidence in being protected when they're threatened. One young mother had been held up was it weeks or months before she took that, held up at gunpoint. She was going to do something about that next time. How that turns out, if that ever happens, we don't know, all right, at this point. We need to take a break, and we'll be back. Let's say it's 3:10 right now. Can we come back and reconvene in 10 minutes at 3:20? And then we'll walk you through, Emily and I will walk you through how we do river to river as well, okay? Please take a seat and we'll resume here. I think this is till 4:20. That's the direction. It's 4:20. Okay, very good. So we've got a little bit of time here. At this point, I feel I have to say it's midstream on this edition of River to River. Yeah. Okay, so now the second half of our class today is, and as it works, we're starting close to home, and we're going to be talking with other guests in future sessions, but right now, I thought it would be interesting for you to kind of peek behind the curtains and see how we make River to River and talk of Iowa. And with me here is Emily Woodbury, and she is a producer for both of our talk shows. If you didn't know this, Iowa Public Radio's talk shows are based in Iowa City. The music service, for instance, is based in Cedar Falls. Our headquarters are in Des Moines. Our technical center is in Ames. It kind of got divvied up between the three public universities there when we formed Iowa Public Radio. And Emily's, how long have you been a producer with us?
I have been a producer with IPR since 2012, and before that I was an intern for the talk shows.
Mm-hmm. And originally from the Chicago area?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let's sort of, we haven't rehearsed any of this, and that's good because it'll be spontaneous, right?
As a producer, I do not like spontaneous. I like things planned out. But that's okay.
The sort of thing that we tell producers is that I like to, producers, from a host perspective, producers worry so you don't have to. And that's why, and you would agree with that, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's because, we like to say, okay, the host has to be relaxed, going on, be confident, have the right information, know who the guests are and things like that. And if you're not, I can tell you, I've been in a number of situations going into an hour where I'm not clear about what the guests are doing. I'm not clear about, I didn't do my homework as well as I should have on the issue. It's a really horrible feeling. And not to say that was a producer's problem. I have my own problems. But anyway, let's start off with how it starts. So, Emily, how do we typically get an idea?
Yeah.
Or what are the ways in which we can get an idea for a talk show?
I mean, sometimes you have someone coming in to speak, someone big coming in. If Jane Goodall's coming to Iowa City, we want to interview her. So that's kind of an easy, this person's coming, let's book them and talk to them. But sometimes it's more of a concept show, like the show about a gun class. We have to kind of plot out, who are the perspectives that we want to hear from, who would fit that perspective. Is it balanced? It's not always just politics that needs to be balanced. It's everything else, and everything can be political. So, we're thinking about balance, we're thinking about who the guests are, and is it relevant to the audience? And is it news, especially for River to River? Talk of Iowa is a little bit more arts and culture. So, I'll come to the talk show team with an idea, Ben will sign off on it. We all, one of the ways I know something's a good show is if it derails the meeting and we end up talking about it for 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, this is a talk show. People will care about that. And then, basically I go about setting, I do all these notes for Ben, and sometimes it makes me sad because I put in so much work to the notes and only Ben sees them, but it translates into a talk show that lots of people hear. But, I give him the information, who the guests are, what their titles are, what their perspectives are. I give him kind of a trajectory, where do we want the show to take us throughout the hour? What kind of questions do we want listeners to answer? And even for each guest that you hear on River to River, I might have actually interviewed 2 or 3, maybe even 4 people to get to that person that's the right person to speak on the show. Because sometimes you call someone and even if, their background is in sociology, they may not be able to speak to this topic. Or maybe, sometimes we have to think about, do they have an accent that's too strong for our listeners to understand? You have to take those things into consideration because we're limited in that way on the radio.
Mm-hmm. So you can kind of picture, we have a 1:30 meeting every day. We gather, and it's often combined with our lunch in our little, we have one room, and we have 6 cubicles, and there are 4 producers, and 2 hosts. And so any one of us can have a sort of an idea to throw out to either, be worked on or like, that doesn't really work for that reason. And then, as Emily said, once it's agreed upon and the host says, yeah, I like that, I think that'll be good. And very often in the group think there are, things that, Emily as a producer would be noting. Oh, let's make sure for balance sake we have, and balance might be 2 perspectives, it might be 3 perspectives, so that we hear everything relevant to that. And then that's when your work in the trenches really gets started, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, the pre-interviewing, the finding the voices, yeah. And finding out
what does
what
that
they can
call
speak
usually
to.
go like? Let's say you have someone we've never had on the show before. What does that typically go like? How do you approach them? You call them and...
Yeah, so I call them and I don't say that I'm calling them to be on a talk show. I just say, hey, I'm doing a little bit of research. I want to get some information from you. And, I just start asking them about their work, if it's a paper they published recently, I ask them to kind of tell me, what they found in the paper or, like a scientific paper or, just tell me about your work. How does it why does it interest you? Because sometimes you just need to kind of break the ice and get people comfortable talking to you. It's actually really satisfying sometimes when I have someone who's really nervous on the phone with me, but after talking with me for sometimes even 40 minutes, then they get on the show and their nerves are gone, they're ready to go, they can talk about what they need to talk about, which is really nice. Do they
Here,
ever
let me
refuse
jump up.
to talk to me?
I just asked if they ever refused to talk to her.
Sometimes, I would say almost never. They might talk to me for 30, 40 minutes and then decide not to come on the show. But they're always, unless they have a time constraint, they're always willing to talk to me on the phone. But sometimes that can be frustrating. I had someone who actually ended up on our show, but we had about an hour's worth of conversation. She told me all these things off the record, and we couldn't include it in the show. And I kind of gave Ben that information as background, but he still couldn't ask her about it because she asked us, she said, I won't be willing to speak to this because I'm a CEO of a nonprofit and I don't want my funding to go away. That was frustrating. Yeah.
In some cases, I'm trying to think, maybe you can help me think of an example where some people, we don't really accept preconditions for an interview and things like that. And there was one example very recently, I'm trying to remember who it was.
A DACA recipient?
The what?
DACA recipient?
The DACA recipient who, to go by their first name, if there's a reasonable person would think they could incur some kind of harm from being outed on the radio, so to speak. A DACA recipient would be now one of those people. I've interviewed, former heroin addicts, former prostitutes, former so women who, as girls, were, put into prostitution. These are all good reasons you don't want to. But in terms of the preconditions, sometimes we say we realize that you can't answer that question, but the host still has to ask that question, and you can decline it the way you see fit. And what was the key? That was just a little while ago. It's not coming to me right now. So that the listener is not saying, well, why didn't you ask that question?
It was a university president. Is that what you're thinking of?
Knowing those university presidents, it probably, yeah.
And it wasn't something too controversial. I think it was just that they weren't ready to answer that at that time.
Right.
Maybe that wasn't it.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, when we said no, we're going to ask some form of that question. And actually, as I remember, they had an answer to it.
Yeah. Also, when someone says, "Ooh, I don't want to talk about that," it's like, well, now we have to ask that question. We're definitely going to now.
It's like, let's not go over there. That's where the gold is. Let's not go over there, though.
But yeah, I mean, even since you mentioned the trip to the gun shop, that gun shop owner was a little bit wary about us coming in. So I had to spend a few phone calls with him to get him really comfortable with who we are and what our mission is and what our goal was that day. And then I think he ended up being he was like, yeah, that program was really fair. I felt well represented. But it did take some comforting and some time together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How long does this take?
Question, how long does this take? Yeah, how many hours goes into that? And I sit right, there's only a cubicle wall dividing me from Emily, so I hear these conversations. I'm like, oh my gosh, Emily's really working hard on this one. I'm better bring my best too at work as hard as I can.
It really does vary. I mean, sometimes all the puzzle pieces form together, but sometimes it's harder and it takes, a week to get a show ready, which for a show like River to River, where you have to be on the news, it's a little bit harder because sometimes you are calling people 2 days before you're trying to book them. Or, sometimes I'll be, I'll say, okay, I need a psychologist with, X, Y, and Z expertise. And then I find that person, and I book them, and I schedule them. Okay, you're going to show up at the studio. And then I find someone who's even better, and I have to decide, do I kind of cancel on that person to get the better person? Because, and that's hard to do because you're always really at the bottom line is keeping your listeners in mind. You want what's best for the audience. So sometimes we do have to make those hard decisions. So, it's hard to see how that fits in. I don't know. That's a good point. I should really jot down hours of how long it takes to produce each show, because really what I'm doing is I'm working on, 4 or 5 shows at any time.
And that can vary. You can have shows that are sort of like, they feel like, to a producer, I'm sure, like reinventing the wheel, not reinventing the wheel, but doing it from the ground, understanding the issue, reading about the issue, getting the guests, finding, an all new guests. That's one end of it. The other end of it is like the show that I did today, which is Politics Day, where we have about 24. We had a new one added to, but about 24 political analysts we go to. Emily's made a list of their names, their titles, but also their areas of expertise. So when we approach Wednesday, then we can look at that list and say, oh, well, international politics really seem to be dominating a lot of the news right now. Let's do an hour that's at least half on international politics. And so there are no pre-interviews with our political analysts.
No.
And those are known quantities, just like there are no pre-interviews with the Hort Gang and things like that. So those are ones that are just like plug them in and they go, right?
Yep.
As long as your guest agrees to it, things like that. Now, you asked about people refusing to, and Emily's excluding, I think, in her mind, the politicians who don't agree to be on our program. Because we have here, typically at the beginning of a congressional session, we like to get around to all of our now, because we've been redistricted, four members of Congress, 2 senators. We like to get to them in the first half of the year. Well, this is the first time, and I've been doing this since 2007, that we have had an inability, and I'll just say it this way, an inability for them to find time for us.
Schedules are very busy.
Schedules are very busy. You will hear, how many times do you hear that?
Oh, I check in. One lawmaker I've been trying to book for a very long time. I check in about once a month, and I got an email today saying, let's look at 2018. I'm like, really?
And we don't have to be secretive about the name.
It's Representative Rod Blum. Yeah.
Of the first
I've been
district.
working with his people to get him on the air.
We haven't had Rod
Yeah.
Blum. We haven't had this congressional session. We haven't had Joni Ernst either. We had Charles Grassley. Yeah. Just a minute. Let me run back there and get this question here so we don't miss out on that. Oh, hold on. Wait, please.
This is just about Rod, and I saw his an interview attempt on television. I think it was KCRG, and he just got up and left.
Yeah.
Rather than answer this question, which was really a reasonable question.
And thereby he went viral with that video and made national news, where if he just answered the question, he would have been forgotten. That interview would have been forgotten. So he kind of shot himself there too. But
That's an interesting interview note. Yeah.
Yeah, we do have some. Let me run up here.
Is there a widespread conception in Iowa that Iowa Public Radio tends to be liberal, and when I don't think that. Don't misunderstand me, but I mean, in this political climate, some people that might be on the right are hesitant to be interviewed by you.
Well, I could tell you, I mean, it keeps coming up that this gun shop owner just told me he thought that. He was like, beforehand, before we, interviewed him and met him and worked with him, he was like, yeah, I was talking with, my employees, and we thought, oh, it's, what are you doing inviting this liberal news organization in? And he said, I can see that you're not actually like that. And that was a conception I had beforehand.
And they have done surveys, and I can, if someone's interested, I can find the specific survey, because I know our people who are reaching out for sort of liaison with communities, they typically have this question. There, studies done that, typically public media consumers tend to almost be like thirds in Democratic, independent, and conservative too. Whereby I think you have to then also figure in, when you think of the radio, the whole radio climate here, what else is out there on the dial that competes? There's not a lot of liberal radio out there. Where do liberals have to go to hear, in some cases, liberals on our airwaves? We have conservatives, we have liberals, we have independents. Whereas if you are a conservative, where else do you have to go on the radio dial? You got a ton of places. Rush is out there. He loves your ears. He would, he loves to talk to your ears. And if you're a Christian evangelical, you have a lot of radio service there for you too. So I think in that case, it's not a matter of us not having different representations. It's just that if you have a belief as a Christian, fundamentalist Christian, they're going to be siphoned away from us, right? And the same thing with people who are like Rush Limbaugh fans. So that's something to consider there too. But we do, our aim is to be really, as we say, our mission is to represent. And I know from talk shows, we get all classes, truckers to professors and doctors and lawyers.
That's true. And it's only happened 1 or 2 times, maybe 2, 3 times, but I've actually produced shows where just one show, someone on the left had a complaint that we were being too conservative, and a conservative emailed in saying we were too liberal. So I was like, okay, well, there you go. But
yeah, if you're getting fire from both sides.
yeah, we do have quite a diversity of listeners, though, more than people think.
Emily, do you find what sort of common misconceptions do you run into that people have about what you do for talk shows or how talk shows run?
I think the biggest question, or the most popular question people have for me is, what do you do? Because they think, and I think that's a good thing, because you want it to seem like a seamless, effortless conversation the host is having with some people on a topic. You want to tune in and think you're overhearing a conversation at a coffee shop. But, I do a lot of the research for the shows. Like I said, I help prepare that kind of the notes for Ben. So a lot of it is just scheduling and making sure everyone's in the right place. All the guests know who the other guests are and their perspective. So a lot of the behind the scenes work to get that conversation going. There's a lot more than most people know about. And
how much time does all that take?
How much time does it take?
Again, it can really vary. I mean, sometimes during January it takes a long time because everyone's on vacation, no one's available. So a lot of times my stress level is depending on other people's availability. So that could take longer. I have to call more people to find the right guest. So it could take as much as a day. I've produced a show the day beforehand, or it could take weeks, It really depends.
Do they come into your studio?
Often, yep. They come into our studios or join us by phone. Next week we're connecting with someone in Italy right now. So,
yeah, and so when you hear, and sometimes it sounds like they're in the same studio as me or the same studio as Charity, is that they may be in. We're spread out, decentralized in Iowa Public Radio. So we have studios in Iowa City, Cedar Falls, Ames, and Des Moines. So we have the people all spread across the state, and you will say, if you'd like to, you can pick the nearest studio, you can go to it.
it does help, though, to have them in the studio with Ben, because there's something about being able to see the person that you're talking to that really, is ideal. And, we can't only interview people from Iowa City, so we don't get that a lot of the time. But you can tell when a conversation is being had where the people can see each other. It's really nice.
Right, and I think this was before you arrived today. That we had a question about Terry Gross, and in Terry Gross's autobiography or memoir, whatever you want to say, she doesn't like to have people in the studio with her. And the interesting way that she thinks about it is, she says, I don't want to have any more information than the listener has. So that's an interesting way to think about it. If you're sitting across from me and I'm interviewing you, I'm getting all kinds of cues from your face that the listener doesn't know anything about. And so I think that makes sense in a way, is I only want the information that I'm getting from your voice because that's all the information the listener has, which is an interesting way to think about it. But also, I completely understand, and I love to have people in the studio with me because I can see on their face, if I have like 3 people on my table and, this person, Joe, is talking and Sally's over here. Joe says something, I can see out of the corner of my eye. Sally's like, what kind of nonsense is that? And then I can, Sally doesn't know it, but she's just cued me to go to Sally for a disagreeing of an opinion that doesn't match with what was just said. Yeah. Did you want to say something more about that?
Oh, sure. I was just going to say, and then, another misconception people have is they always ask me, so, because I'm pretty early in my career, so when are you going to get to TV? And I'm like, I don't want to work in TV. I love, the style of journalism that public radio is. And also, I think even TV constraint, like radio constrains you. Like I said earlier, there could be someone who's really good, but their accent, you can't understand it. On TV, there are even more constraints that you have that, you basically, I don't know, that you don't have to deal with radio, that sort of
Okay,
thing.
let's go to another question from Louise.
I would just like to know if you would like to interview Donald Trump.
Well, it's a rare experience unless you work for Fox News to interview
We
Donald.
did. We put out a lot of asks during the campaign.
Clay Masters almost had him, didn't he? I thought was there a yes from because he
I
did
don't
get
know
Hillary.
if there was a solid yes.
There was
I don't
one
remember
morning
that.
when it was like Clay was saying, it looks like it's going to happen. But, Donald Trump really did something revolutionary in this, no rules sort of campaign war that he was doing, and changed the rules and said, I'm going to make, I'm going to call into your shows, and they're like Fox shows, and that puts you on the defensive because your producer couldn't plan for that. When I have, a politician on, I've known that at least a day in advance, more often the case, several days in advance. So we as a team can get together and say, well, what questions do we need to ask Dave Loebsack, and for instance. But if you have a call-in show on Fox and Friends or something, and candidate Trump calls in, you didn't have time to go get your quiver of arrows, did you?
And you can't do any fact checking beforehand.
You can't do any
often when we have a
fact-checking?
politician on, you can
Right.
kind of guess, okay, they're going to say this. Let's make sure we understand, how true that is, or what the argument is on the other side, or that sort of thing.
And that's you mentioned fact checking, and people, another common email will be, how could you have let that person say that was wrong? Well, in a live interview, and this is again, we go back to sort of Terry Gross pre-recorded versus live radio, is you're one person, and usually I'm chatting online with Emily, if she's my producer for that. I mean, people put out information there. You cannot possibly fact check everything there.
No, and you can't take back what they said. But also, I mean, it is kind of important to hear how someone feels, even if it's not true, especially if it's a politician, I mean, it's good, because sometimes people will say, well, why did you even put them on? Well, because a lot of people feel that way. So if we
Right.
can, we'll, correct them if we know they've said something false. But other time, that is important to get that perspective out there so you know what's going on.
Right. Or if I have a caller who makes a claim, or a guest who makes an unexpected claim that I don't know about, I will throw in a phrase, and I know other hosts do this too. Well, we have no way of knowing right this moment if that's true or not, just to throw it in there so that the listener knows, okay, I'm not accepting that as a fact. That has yet to be verified. I'm not saying it's untrue. I'm just saying it's what you say.
Well, while you're doing the interview, is she?
What's that?
While you're doing the interview, is she in the same room?
No, we're separated by a soundproof glass plane. Yep. I can hear everything he's saying, and I can chat him. We don't have those earpieces. I don't know if you would like that.
I don't think so. No,
Ben
but-
asked this question. No, but I can chat him things. So I could say, hey, it's time to bring Jeff on. We got to get to his perspective before. Well, not interrupt him, but give a suggestion via chat. No one would hear me say that. I'm
It's
chatting.
just in a chat window, like
Yeah.
your instant messaging or things like that, and so there's some communication there. And you might even pick up during a live talk show. You'll hear a little clicking because we don't have noiseless keyboards. So I'm listening to the person on the phone, or you if you're across from me, and I'm going.
Yeah, that's us
And
talking.
then take a message to Emily, and then I look on my screen and wait for a message back. Because sometimes we do what is cascading. Cascading guests mean I start off the hour with one guest, and then I add a second guest. And then, 30 minutes into the show, I add a third guest. And then finally, I add a last guest for the last part. And then by the end of the show, you have 4 guests. So we cascade them in, and that has to be coordinated. I have to know that third guest is on the line. I don't want to go to a guest, and you do hear this occasionally, and it's usually a technical problem. We've got to get our phones, new phone system, but you'll go to a guest, and of course you've heard it on any number of programs where guest is not there.
That's
Yeah,
the
talk
worst
about
feeling
that.
in the
Talk
world.
about that as a producer.
My
I
stomach
know what it
just
feels
sinks
like as a
thinking
host.
about it. Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. And it's easy to even blame yourself even when you've done everything you can to make sure, that this happened. Like you can tell a guest 1,000 times, we're going to call you at 10 a.m., and they'll forget. And then I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but we're going to have you, Anyway, so yeah, having a guest not be there, having technical difficulties is very tough and stressful, because then you have the host sitting there going, what do I say? And then, we're trying to come up with what we're going to do on the spot. And that is kind of exciting. It's a little thrilling, a little scary and dangerous, live radio. But most days it works out. It actually surprisingly works out more often than it doesn't.
Yeah.
But
And I have a lot of confidence in Emily, working with her closely for
Thanks.
several years. And I've worked with producers I don't have the confidence in before. And so it's this day in and day out that I go back to this phrase, and it's not meant in a mean way, that Emily worries so that I don't have to. And I know how Emily works, how conscientious she is about it. That gives me a great sense of calmness, that I need to have my brain be kind of fluid and work the way it should as a host. If I've been in other shoes with another producer that is, I'm not sure if they've covered all their bases, or they're thinking about that, it makes me nervous. It makes me nervous, I suppose, in the same way as I don't know, if you're a surgeon and you don't know if you're being handed the right instrument from your assistant.
I've listened to your show a lot, and also to Charity's, and I just am amazed by how much background you have. And I'm thinking, have you read every book? How can you, and to have all that background and then to call it forward at the exact right minute? I don't quite see how you
Call it forward. What do you mean by that?
in the interview. You're able to think about something maybe you read a week ago, or that.
Well, we have, and a lot of it is the prep, and that's why I'm saying confidence in your producers. And these are the unsung heroes in this little team here that we have here. Is I get almost all the glory, or Charity does, when in fact there's a lot of work done by Emily and the other producers we have here, though. But simply notes, having notes, which anybody, I'm sure a number of you have taught and lectured. You know how you like your notes set up. I'm very kind of OCD about how I like my notes. And I like to access information quickly with my eyes, so that if somebody goes down this road, one of my guests, I can locate relevant information very quickly. And that's kind of what I do.
And I think that information kind of funnels. So I ask the guests to kind of dumb it down for me, or not dumb it down, but like make it simple. If I'm talking about astrophysics, I don't, you need to make it simple for me in the audience. And then I take that and I make it simple for Ben, so he can think, okay, I'm going to ask
So I can
this,
understand it.
Yeah, so it's kind of information going down
I know
the
you.
various funnels. And I think that's actually something I didn't do well when I first started producing, is I would get all these pre-interview notes and I'd just give Ben essays worth of information. And then it took me a while to think, okay, he doesn't need all that. He needs to just know what he needs to ask. So I think that's part of it too.
Or the one way I like to think about it is what are, in any given issue, the must-ask questions. So I have the must-ask questions, because you never know how fast your guests are going to, as we say, kind of burn through the material, right? How expansive that discussion will be. You can go through things very quickly, and you're just like, oh my God, I thought that was going to take 30 minutes, and it's only taken half that much time. So you have to be prepared for the conversation either to be smaller, shorter than you thought it would be, or longer. So I like to have a set of, well, this is what when we're talking about, I don't know, gun rights, or I don't know, whatever, carry and conceal, this is what we have to talk about during the hour. And then we've got another list of topics that is, time permitting, we can go to those things too. But it won't be the end of the world, or we won't be seen as deficient if we don't get to those during the hour.
Yep.
It's kind of a nice way to think
There are
about
more conversations to be had. Yeah.
Right.
We'll do it in the next
it. Unless
time.
someone else had a burning question, Emily's got another project that I wanted to have her talk about. But if there were any other questions for Emily about her job, you all know what a producer is now, right? And you can know that that's a huge part of what we do. We have 4 producers. Yeah, Emily, Lindsay Moon, Ben Stanton, and Dennis Reese.
Although Dennis Reese doesn't produce for your show. He produces for Talk of Iowa. But he's also, you hear him, he's on the air all day doing the shift, the news shift as well. So, yeah.
Okay, let me go over here, and I wanted to ask Emily about StoryCorps, because she had a unique experience recently, and you were, raise your hand if you've heard of StoryCorps. Okay, everybody should have, if you're any kind of listener to public radio. It's a national show, or a national, what do you call it, program. It's been around for quite a while, and I'll just let Emily take over. And you were recently, when StoryCorps came to Iowa, the producer who did what?
Yeah, so has anyone in this room done a StoryCorps interview? You have, okay. So and you spend, 40, 45 minutes with another person having a conversation, and I'm sure that time probably goes by really fast. And it was my job to take that 40 minutes of conversation and turn it into a 3-minute conversation, but making it sound like that 3-minute conversation, is seamless. You can't just, cut. It's interesting. One of the hardest things about editing the StoryCorps interviews was, and usually they're talking about something very emotional or personal, was editing it down, because sometimes the way your voice kind of goes throughout a sentence can make it sound natural or unnatural if you cut it in the middle, but taking 40 minutes and bringing it down to 3 is really, really hard. There are so many gems in there, and one thing we like to call that sort of process is kind of, you have to kill your darlings. So, in this particular interview, a civil rights activist was being interviewed by her cousin, and there were a lot of darlings in there. But I decided to focus on Mary Campos' early life and what got her interested in her civil rights work, just because, she's had a lot of interviews about what she's done for civil rights, what are the issues now, and I thought it would be really interesting to kind of go back and hear her remember something that happened to her when she was young.
Okay, so we'll listen to this and maybe keep in mind any questions you might have for Emily after we hear this. And as you see, it's 3:39. If you didn't know, all of our programming is archived on our website. So you can, if you missed it in the live broadcast, you go back to our website and you'll see this little thing here, and you can I'll click on it to play it, but if you right-click on this, you can download the audio as an MP3 onto your device, and have it that way too. So let's listen to this. Any other setup you need to tell about this, or?
No, let me see, because it doesn't introduce it in the clip, but so this is a civil rights activist, Mary Campos. She's from Des Moines, talking with her cousin Dawn Martinez Oropesa.
When was the first time that you realized that you were Mexican and what that meant? Even though you're a U.S. citizen, your parents are U.S. citizens.
I think when we went to school at McKinley, there was a teacher there, and she wasn't very kind. We were speaking some Spanish, and she came and told us, "You're not allowed to speak that language. You have to speak English." And I said, I was just speaking to my sisters, and we were going to eat our lunch. My mom had made us some tacos or quesadillas or something, and the boys were floating around there. They wanted to trade their sandwiches for our sandwiches, and they were Italian and African American, and she came to me and said, "You cannot be speaking that language." And I wondered why. Why couldn't I speak that language? I spoke that language at home with my grandparents because they didn't speak English,
Right.
So that was the first time I found out I was different.
So when was it for you that you decided you wanted everybody to do better, and the African Americans?
Well, following my graduation, my mother was so proud of me being the first one of 8 kids to graduate that she was going to take me on a trip to California. So then we went to Burlington bus line to get on the bus.
Yeah.
And I was sitting with my mother, and I got up because there was 3 African American service people in the back of the bus. So being the kind of kid I was kind of nosy, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I went back to talk to the young people, and we were busy talking. And all of a sudden, the bus stops with a great big lurch. Well, and this big man, he was a bus driver, and he said, you cannot sit there. You cannot be back here with these people because this is reserved for blacks, and you have to go sit in your seat. And that just really tore me up, Dawn. I felt so bad. And I get emotional when I talk about it because it's a nightmare to think I'm 88 years old and I can relive this story. It's pathetic.
I'm surprised that they let like the Mexicans go with the whites.
Well, they didn't,
especially because you're pretty dark.
Well, I know, but they didn't. I wasn't African American.
Yeah, I know that they had a lot of signs that would be.
Yeah, and they'd say white
Latinos
only, or
Wow.
So this man was enforcing the
law.
black and white law that they had, So we went on the bus, and then they'd get off. They were going to get off the bus. My mother said, "We're going to go have something to eat," and I said, "No, I don't want to eat." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because they're going to have a door that says black only and white only, and I'm not going in that restaurant." And she just got kind of upset with me. She said, "You can be so obstinate sometime." And I said, "I'm sorry. It's just the way I feel." I said, "They're as good as I am. Why is there such a distinction, Mother? I can't handle it."
Yeah.
So we went on to California, and then when I came back, I started looking for a job, Dawn.
Yeah.
And I made several applications. I was good in math. I was good in shorthand. I was good in typing. I spoke 2 languages. I was a good speller. I loved to read.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find a job. And you know why? Because I was brown. The man told me the one day, "You had a good application and good interview, but I'm sorry, but everyone in this office, we're all white, and they don't know how you'll fit in with these people. And you tell someone that's 17 years old something like that, what are you doing?"
Final parting words for the future generation of Latinos and civil rights leaders?
Well, to remember to honor their parents and the history that we've had, because Mexico had a lot of history.
Yeah.
We gave up a lot to the United States, a lot. And so I think that our young men and women need to know the history and value who they are and work to even make it better.
So, in that interview, this is why I work in radio, because if you just heard, or were reading an interview online and just heard her quote saying, "It was really emotional, like, to think I can relive it now, it's pathetic." I mean, that's such a different vibe than you get from hearing her relive that experience, which I think is really cool. And that seemed longer. Interesting.
So
Yeah, that's true.
And so this was the you were making it 1/10 of its original length here. What do you remember about the specific challenges for this interview? I mean, because this is something that was new to you. Not to say that you haven't edited things down, but this is a drastic case of going. Often we'll, if we have to pre-record an interview and we have like either a 23-minute slot or a 22-minute slot, and I'll sometimes record them for 25 or 30 minutes, then, Emily's task is then to shave off 7, 8, maybe even as much as 10 minutes. But here you had to reduce it by a huge factor.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there were things like the fact that she was kind of tearing up and crying during part of it, that meant I couldn't end it a certain way because then her voice would be all clear, so I had to kind of trail down and you could hear her blowing her nose and then she started being clear again, her voice. So it was weird, things like that, or breathing you have to take into account. But one of the darlings I had to kill on this one, she was talking about how her parents were migrant workers in Iowa and they would live in a chicken coop, and her mom would just scrub it, and she could never get it clean enough because that's where their family was living, in this chicken coop. And she would, bring quesadillas and coffee to the workers during the day, and then she'd just sit in the chicken coop. And she was so grateful for this teacher she had that lent her a textbook so that she could study in the chicken coop all day. And while, other kids went to school, and I just thought that was amazing. And, a lot of factors went into cutting that out, but that was something that was really hard for me to let go because I thought that was really interesting and kind of eye-opening and puts things in perspective.
We're going to wind up class here. I had some closing things to do, but as we finish up here with Emily, any further questions about her experience as a producer here or having to do with StoryCorps that you wanted to find? Let me get back to you with that microphone. Sure, John.
Well, if you have so much great material, is there any way to legitimately repurpose it?
Well, the internet's a great source for that. Because we had to make this fit into the newscast for Morning Edition, but online we could air the full thing if we wanted to. So the internet's
And
a
very
good
often
way
you'll
to do
hear
that.
that too. That you'll say the extended interview or the full interview.
Yeah.
You can find online at npr.org or iowapublicradio.org.
That's true. But sometimes, even when it's hard for me to cut stuff out and then I listen to it, not necessarily this, but sometimes you get so attached to your subject, you might think, oh, this is really interesting, but really to the listener, the edited version is the better one. So it depends.
I'm just curious on how you made a tough decision between the chicken coop and the story you chose.
Yeah, I would say so I definitely wanted to keep in the bus story because that was the pivot in her life that made her pursue this. And then it was a lot of logistical things like the crying kind of coming down and the questions Dawn was asking. The reason I kept the part about her trying to get a job and not the chicken coop part is because just in a narrative sense, it made sense that way. It was like, okay, she went on the bus with her mom, she came back, decided this was going to be her life's work and started to find jobs. And it kind of brought back that initial thing that she said, when did you know you were Mexican? When you were different, because the teacher told me to stop speaking Spanish, and then I had a hard time getting a job because of that. So I felt in that narrative sense that it worked that way. But the chicken coop story is wonderful. I wish I could add it in. Yeah.
Mary.
She felt about other people. The way the lady felt about other people. Their concern was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 I thought that was important to keep in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's true.
One question that just occurs to me before we end this part here, Emily, is you have had the chance also to step into the host role, I think, for Charity, as well, I know for my show. What happens when you do that? I mean, you get a different perspective, and I know it changes or it helps you in your producer position too, right?
Yep. I think that really made me realize about like what information the host needs. Like I said, handing someone an essay that they have to read through isn't always helpful. So kind of, having quick hits of information at your disposal. What's this person's title, Because I think, when you say worst things that ever happened, I had a guest on and she was the owner of this indie music studio in X, Y, and Z town, but in her title, it didn't have the name of the studio. So when I realized I was on the air talking with her and I was about to say goodbye, and I was like, I don't know what the name of her studio is. So I just said, it's in a music studio in this town, but I felt so awful that I didn't, say the name in the studio.
I don't know if this was with you or someone else. It reminds me of another time that I had, because we get our notes we use Outlook Calendar for it. And for some weird reason, I usually, copy all the notes, put them into my Word document and start to work with them and add my own thoughts and research and things like that. And for some reason on this particular day, we had 2 guests, let's just say, I think in our Des Moines studio. But for some reason, I scrolled down and only copied the one guest. So I got prepared. And so I don't know, was this with you? So we got to the end of the hour, and then I walked out of the studio thinking I'd done a fine job and said, Ben, you didn't even talk to the other guest we had in. For the entire hour, this person was waiting for me to introduce them, and I was oblivious to it. I wanted to find a big brick wall and get my head going on it.
It's true. And that was me. And it's really, when things go wrong, it's like, there's no, that's not something
It was my fault, totally.
I don't know. So, but everyone kind of shares that was awful. I remember that. Making
so
that
bad.
call afterwards was
And of course, I apologized, and then we said, well, we'll try to, when that topic comes up again, we'll think of you first. And,
one big
But anyway, I'm going to have to draw this
host-
to a close. Our class is coming to a close, but quick question. Yeah.
I'm aware other states don't have 2 local state shows, and maybe some of them have more, but some have none. I just would like you to speak to that, either one of you. Why Iowa? You know, why Iowa? I mean, I think it's a privilege. We get to have two. And I'm just curious about.
Well, because we have great supporters, for one thing. You're more. You can cover your time with less money if you just import your programming, for sure.
Yeah, there's a difference.
But we feel, and add to this, we feel, our mission is to be relevant to our audience, which means, Iowa topics get a good amount of time.
Yeah, I think it's because at one point before I joined, we were given the chance, and then since it keeps working out really well, it keeps being supported, which is great. I mean, people find it valuable, so yeah. And I guess one more thing that I learned from guest hosting is just how, and this is interviewing, how on you have to be. I mean, you have to be so on and engaged. It's exhausting. When 1 o'clock comes, it's like, oh my God, I could, you probably feel that a little bit less because you do it every day, but it is interesting.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. It does feel a little bit. We had a grade school class in our studios today. And I kind of likened it to, I said, it's a little bit like a performance, like if you've been in a play or something like that. The curtain goes up at 12 and it goes down at 1 o'clock. And you get the same sort of sense of, okay, you're approaching, you're looking at the clock, and this is when the show starts. And so it's the same kind of feeling that you have. And then afterward, on any given night, if you're in a play, you have one shot at it. And then you either feel good about what you did that night, or you say, ooh, could have done better. So yeah, it's that way. But anyway, let's thank Emily for coming today and
thanks for having me.
Giving us a peek behind the curtain. Thanks, Emily. I just have a few things to finish up with before we end here in 5 minutes. I have some homework for you. For those who choose to do this, of course, it won't be figured into your final grade for this class. If you have something, it's not hard to remember, but if you want to note this too, so something that plays off StoryCorps here is going to the website, and you can Google or put your favorite search engine on StoryCorps. This is storycorps.org, and if you see it says /participate and great questions, you can explore this web page. This is it really is neat in that it shows you how to interview someone, okay? And along with hearing the stories here, you can learn how to do it yourself. So this is one of the pages at storycorps.org, great questions. So they have different categories, great questions for anyone, great questions for grandparents, great questions about raising children or war or religion. What I would like you to do, and this is not necessarily for next week, though if you had it done by next week, that would be good. I would like to have a discussion. I had originally kind of envisioned, because I didn't know no sense of time, that we were going to do this in the class. I don't, having interview each other, that's not going to work. That works in a semester-long course, but not in this condensed version here. So what I'm asking you to do is to find someone who has a pivotal moment. Maybe it's a pivotal moment in their life that you shared with them, or you maybe in your family, and do what Emily has been doing here. Get together with that person. You don't need to record it. I want you to record the experience of it in your memory. So get together with that person beforehand. Do your preparation. Jot down some questions. I jot down questions for every show. Not that I'm going to be a slave to these questions. But Scott Simon said it best when I was early on. He said, these are, or I think it was either Neil Conan, Ray Suarez, I don't know who but he said, for a host who is new and perhaps nervous, those questions are your safety net. And you're up on the tightrope, and you've practiced enough. You can walk that tightrope. But you'll be nervous. So figure that in, and if you have a safety net, you won't be nervous and you'll be able to do your job. So maybe that. So you can write out questions, half dozen questions about this pivotal experience that you want to talk to someone about. Have a 10 or 15 minute conversation. I would say that would be kind of a minimum. You might find that it goes on longer than that. And as we were brought up back here, I think it was Terry back here, work on those, do those open-ended questions, and you'll find them in here too. Great questions for anyone. Let's look at what they have here. So if you click on that, you get question, who's been the most important person in your life? Can you maybe that pivotal experience that you're going to that person for is someone who has passed away, who was a big part of their life, and you want to make that the focus of your conversation with them. Have them tell you about how that person shaped their life in a momentous way. Okay? I don't think it'll be next week, because next week would be more focused on politics. But if you want to do that, please do, because I'd like to go out and have you share in a short way to the rest of the class your experiences of really tapping into someone's pivotal experience, to have them tell you about it. Clear? Good. Okay. The other bit, and this is for next week, this is a podcast, but it's also accessible on the internet. So if you have a mobile device, you can download it. If not, you can listen to it online, and I think I've got my audio right here. So this is, if you just do a Google search for The Turnaround, that is what this podcast is called. The Turnaround. Jesse Thorne is an interviewer, and this whole podcast is really interesting. He is interviewing famous interviewers about their craft. So you've got an interview. You might want to listen to Terry Gross. Larry King is on there, all kinds. But the one I'd like you to listen to for next week is Ira Glass. Okay. This American Life, Ira Glass. So if you type into your search machine these words, The Turnaround, podcast, and Ira Glass, the first hit will be this page right here. So The Turnaround, podcast, Ira Glass, and you will land on here and be able to go down here and listen now, okay? We won't try that again because we know how that works in this setting. And he has just a number of really excellent insights to interviewing and experiences that he has had. And I know there must be a lot of fans here of This American Life. And we can talk a little bit about this. Ira Glass stands on the shoulders of another great interviewer from the Chicago area. Anybody want to guess who that is? One I always bring into my teaching. Not too many years ago, I had a chance to interview him, Studs Terkel. Studs Terkel. Just a marvelous man. And really, his 1973 book, I always bring that into my classes on interviewing, called Working, which was, he helped, before interviews were like, oh, if you're a big shot, leader of the community, doctor, somebody with high status, then it's worth interviewing you. If you're doing, if you're a nurse, you're a teacher, Studs Terkel, we know, made us realize that everybody's got really interesting experiences and lives, and the normal, quote, normal people have really interesting perspectives on life that we just love to listen to. And that's where Ira Glass picked up from Studs Terkel. And I've heard him, he doesn't talk about it in this year, but he's, talks about how Studs Terkel really influenced him as a young man to go for the, quote, common man or woman story. I think that's all I have for you. I have to, normally in the other classes I can hang around a little bit to chat. We've got this potluck tonight, so I'm going to scoot away, and I hope I see some of you there at the Terry Trueblood Lodge at the recreation area there on, is that off Sand Road, do we say? Starts at 5:30. Bring a dish, bring something for you to drink. Adult beverages are allowed. And we're Charity's going to be there. She's going to have a little. We were trying to think of trivia questions today. So there'll be trivia. There'll be prizes, and I'll be having. We'll be recording a live set with Elizabeth Moen, a wonderful young singer-songwriter in the area here, and she'll be performing in about an hour-long set. hope to see you all next week. Thanks for being such a great class today.